Good morning, everyone. You will hear my voice, but you will not be able to see me. And that is because we have a wonderful panel of people here with us today to talk about to explore how the identity of Black people in the UK, both individual and collective, how it shapes our access to health services. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this amazing panel of people you see in front of you to introduce themselves before we kick off this amazing roundtable. Do you want to say good morning, everyone? Morning. You will see the mic being handed around a few times. Every single person in this room has vast experience of the topic and the theme, not just because they come from the community of interest that we're talking about, but also because they work with or they have extensive experience in research, or whatever the reason is, we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. So, starting with you, please, Linus, would you like to introduce who you are?
Hi, my name is Linus, and I'm the Director of Research for the North London Foundation Trust, and I'm also Director of Noclor, which is an R&D office for mental health and primary care across North London. Shay and I decided to do this roundtable panel because we both felt it was really important to reflect on the health inequalities that we all suffer, and actually, for me, the place that research has in that and addressing those issues.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will let you all in on a little secret. Ade's just walked in the door, so I know you might be feeling a little bit flustered, but you're okay to introduce yourself? Good, thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ade. I'm Ade Abama Rashid. I'm an Associate Nursing Director, working in Camden. So I'm just really grateful and for the opportunity to talk about this topic. Is something that's always close to my heart, and I've worked in the NHS for over 20 years.
Thank you so much. Across to you, Dr. Deborah.
Hello everyone, my name is Deborah Radlevy. I'm a local GP, so I work in Enfield. I've been there for quite a few years now. I also, as part of my other GP role, as well as doing clinical work and seeing patients, I also work in health inequalities. So it's really nice to be here, to look at the Caribbean route and see how we can help with access to healthcare and address your needs, really. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Across to you, Zoe.
Hi everyone, my name is Zay. I am the CEO of an organisation called Displaced. Our work focuses on tackling health inequity within migrant families and migrant young people. So we take an intergenerational approach.
Hi, thanks. I'm Rachel Faulkner-Gerstein. I'm the Senior Manager at the NHS, our Central London Integrated Care Board, in the Strategy, Research and Communities team. And before that, I was the head of the outcomes framework at the National Institute for Health Research. And one of the things that I was really interested in doing is thinking about measurement. So how do we measure so that we can see the extent of the issues that we're trying to deal with? So,
I'm Simon Lingwe. I am a youth practitioner and service provider, graffiti artist, mural artist, and I've been working in community youth service for about 30 years. So I'm a seasoned vet, and I know what I'm talking about. So that's why I'm obviously on this panel. Thank
you. Amazing.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. My name is Chi Chi, and I'm the founding director of a youth empowerment organisation called Cornerstone Engagement, CIC. I'm also a youth therapist, and I'm here today because I'm really passionate about equity in health. Our organisation supports families and young people across the board, particularly with issues of inequity across education, social care, and a number of different areas. And I'm really, really passionate about this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Simmons-Lewis. I am an author, coach, storyteller, and my background is in journalism and communications strategy. I'm also a director of Chi-Chi's organisation, Cornerstone, and I do the parent coaching program there.
Amazing. And what I'm going to ask you to do, actually, there is someone off camera who you cannot see, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in case you come into the conversation a bit later. So, yeah, can you tell us who you are?
My name is Benoit. I'm working in Haringey. I'm on a joint project with Enfield, and basically it's sort of integrating various partners in the borough. And later on, we've sort of partnered up with Enfield, initially was looking at black men health issues, and it moved on to mental health, all the physical health. We looked at prostate cancer in a big way, had a big campaign going in the heart of Haringey, Wood Green. And then we moved on to looking at the heart and other ailments that occur. And it's been very successful in terms of getting men's groups developing out of that. And recently, as I said, we're looking at, my role is sort of looking at the youth aspect as well. I've been in youth work and FE education for over 35 years. And the input I have, so been retired 10 years, but very community, and the input I have, hopefully it will be sort of rewarding as we see things moving in partnership or not.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And you may well hear from you a little bit later on, and maybe we'll find a way to get you on camera as well. But now that you've heard from everyone, we just want to say welcome to those of you who are watching. I can see the numbers rising, so thank you for coming onto this stream. I want to remind everyone that this stream, the ultimate point of the stream is to bridge the gap, to look at the research and bridge the gap between communities and the healthcare systems, helping professionals and policymakers better serve the communities and populations that are historically underserved and overlooked. And sadly, quite often that is the Black community. Many other communities also that come as part of that global majority. But today, we're specifically looking at the Black community. I'm going to speak about the fact, and I have touched on it, I'm going to speak about the fact, the elephant in the room. Not everybody in the room is Black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the people who do not identify as Black first. So the three of you grouped yourself, actually. I'm going to ask the three of you in the middle of the room to kick us off with this first question. So the first question is, what do health professionals understand about Black communities in the UK? And this may not apply directly to you, Zay, but for both of you, feel free. Thank you.
Start with the health professionals.
So I've actually been speaking to some colleagues of mine who are Black Afro-Caribbean to try and understand this group better and see how we can really serve them and help them to the population. And actually obviously I do my work as a GP, and actually stepping outside that, there are some actually education sessions running for health professionals at the moment to kind of better help understand this group and their health needs. So that's coming up very shortly for us, which I think would be really, really, really valuable. Just to understand how we can better help your ideas, help your beliefs in healthcare and accessing healthcare, and kind of how to help kind of treat any kind of long-term conditions or kind of help prevent kind of long-term conditions. And actually, we want to kind of hear your voices as well. So we've started reaching out to churches and things and pastors who are head of communities to see how we can all work together to tackle health beliefs. So we're starting to do some work with local churches. In particular, talking about starting off talking about certain conditions and what it means to people. For example, people have high blood pressure or diabetes, or maybe people at high risk of getting these things. How we can help through that journey. I know sometimes it can be, people find it a little bit scary, maybe going to a health professional, talking about their fears, talk about getting a diagnosis, living with an illness, and so we really want to interact with the group to try and work together to tackle these kind of worries and anxieties. So hopefully by doing that we can get a better understanding of what the group's beliefs are, and we can all work together to help.
Thank you so much. So, Dr. Rachel, I'm going to put a tough question to you because I think you've done a great job of starting to think about the solutions, actually. But I would like to know what you think the health system thinks about or understands about Black communities right now. Why do we need to do that? Why do we need to do the understanding bit? What do we think?
Oh gosh, that's a question I don't know that I feel super qualified to answer. But,
It's all right, I'm coming to these guys soon, yeah.
I guess from my perspective, having worked in more sort of on the health research side of things rather than sort of in the health system more broadly. I've only joined the NHS 7 months ago, and it's been quite 7 months since then. It's just thinking actually about, if we're talking about population health, we're talking about the whole population. We're talking about everybody. And so actually we need to make sure that everybody is included, and that's sort of in general, but also in specifics. So if we know that there are some issues which affect certain communities specifically, we need to tailor our approach to those communities specifically for the good of that community. But making sure that we're addressing those specific concerns actually has an impact on the whole community. So it impacts the whole population health. So we can't all be healthy unless we're all healthy in our specific ways, but also in general. And we also know from a scientific research perspective that if we're doing clinical trials or we're doing research into specific diseases or conditions, the results of that research won't be generalizable across the population unless we bring everybody into that research. So it's better for everybody if we focus on specific concerns in specific communities. So it's to say, I think that we need to pay attention to this local and the specific, but not just because it's a sort of, an equality good, but it's because it's a communal good. We need to be invested. We need everybody to understand that it's something that we all need to care about because it actually impacts all of us. So that's what I would say from a sort of general perspective.
Thank you so much.
I think for me, I'm really interested in, because, so for example, for myself, in terms of the work that we do at Displaced, I didn't even make the connection that we're working in health until a lot later on. So our focus is a lot on psychosocial development of young people and parents. And something that I'm really interested in seeing more of, and I have not really seen too much of this so far in healthcare, is what is the historic understanding of the impact of like discrimination and racism and, for example, colonialism. How does that impact health, and what are the gaps there in understanding and the gaps in research even to create an evidence base for that understanding? That's something that I'm really interested in, maybe seeing, do I have the wrong impression? Is there more research than I think there is? And how are those things being implemented in the healthcare system? So for me, it's more of a question rather than an opinion that I'd like to kind of give out to the panel as well, that I'm quite curious to hear.
Yeah, no, that's actually perfect and leads me on to the question that I'm now going to throw out to the rest of the panel, and including you both can come back in with your statements as well, and you say, what do we think health professionals miss in their understanding of Black communities? Yeah?
From my perspective, I would say I've worked backwards from this. So I developed a program called Therapeutic Mentoring. So that merges, it's a mix of my experience and skills as a qualified therapist, and also my 30 years plus experience of working as a youth and family practitioner across social care, education, and within the community. And to the question of research, I did my own research. I looked at existing research, and young people of Black African Caribbean heritage were not accessing mainstream traditional health services. And I would say, I'll use an example, not because it's a negative, but everybody knows, I shouldn't say everybody knows, there's significant issues in accessing CAMHS. And when young Black children access CAMHS, they report that there's an issue around feeling accepted, being able to bring their whole self into the space, not feeling judged, etc., etc. I can go on. So based on my research working across those 3 or 4 sectors I've mentioned, the evidence was screaming in my face that there was an issue around well-being for young people of Black, African, Caribbean heritage. So I set up a therapeutic mentoring service, which I'm currently delivering, and young people say that, you know, the evidence, the research that I have is that it was well needed. So in terms of research, I would say from health professionals, this is not saying everybody, it's an acceptance of what often people from these communities are saying. So the impact of racism, the impact of systemic barriers, the impact of discrimination in the workplace, the challenges around accessing things that should be equitably accessed and provided is causing health issues across the board. So I would say from a health perspective is accepting what the evidence is saying, and also probably doing something like a mapping exercise to fund initiatives that are actually working and are embedded within the community. So I don't know if that's answered the question, but you know, there is research out there. It's accepting what people are saying and then funding these initiatives that are actually engaging those communities that are not engaging for specific reasons, and they're not hard to reach communities.
Yeah, that term. Does anyone else want to come in on there?
I can just briefly come in, and it's just for me, I'm really getting goosebumps to just think about what everybody's talking about, because it's something that we don't talk about enough in the NHS. And I'm just listening to everyone. I guess, thank you for sending that sort of script, because you wanted to just come as organic as it flows, because that's where I'm at. I'm not very good with data. I'm not very good with research, but what I think I'm good at is the narrative behind the data. And a lot of the people that we're talking about, the healthcare professionals, are also people from the background that is also discriminated against. So for me, being a Black leader, is my story heard, you know, and from newly qualified nurse to where I am now, there's that additional struggle where you want to assess that person, knowing that you know the data, you know the research, but there's no one else to bounce off your research with. There's no one else to say, okay, is it because you're Black, so you're treating the Black patients differently? I think we need to be able to talk about it without feeling as if you need to justify why you're doing it. I think I've just, that's why I was running a little bit late, because we were talking about data, and I knew I was coming here, and I wanted to leave my team with that story behind the data to recognize research has an impact. So it's not just numbers. You know, I really, every single one of you, just listening to the experience in the room and what everybody's contributing, how can we translate that to when our young people go to A&E, for example, where they go to their GP, they feel seen, who's guiding them with that data? And that's where I think I can just want to contribute to the discussion today. It's about making healthcare professionals who look like me feel comfortable in their skin enough to challenge the status quo. That's one of the issues that I've picked up.
Honestly, I was waiting for you to finish. I nearly was jumping out of my seat because we touched on this. And for those of us who were in the kind of meeting that we had last week, just to find out if any of you had questions and things like this, we touched on it. And I don't know how many of you remember, I said, there's this thing that happens that people who don't understand the type of, I'm going to call it oppression, seems dramatic, but it's oppression. People who don't understand the type of oppression you're talking about will tell you, but you've got a Black doctor, but you've got access. And actually there is something about the person who is now trained, who is now part of the system. And so actually the person has a system, laws and protocols to abide by, as well as this personal side. So when you leave and you go home, you're eating your Black food and your jerk chicken and all the stuff again. But when you're at work, you're not just Ade, who is from, wherever. You are Ade, who was trained at so-and-so and who has a responsibility to her patients and who is meant to treat everybody equitably and all of these things. So actually me coming to you doesn't mean that I'm going to get better or even different treatment. Especially, let's talk about the fact that if race or there are no other identifiers that were part of this, you will just have so much falling off your plate. You've got more patients than you can deal with and that kind of thing. So it's such an important point to think about the fact that even when we have people who get it in the system, where does it leave the community? Yeah, go for it, Linus.
I just wanted to add in, because when you look at health professionals and you look at black health professionals, you have to remember they operate in the racist system. So we operate in the NHS. We are treated in particular ways. We sometimes can feel intimidated, we're sometimes bullied. And so there's that additional bit that comes with it, I think. So you may look to, and rightly so, look to black professionals, look to your black healthcare workers and think that you should get an equitable service. But I think you also have to kind of know that they're part of what is a racist system, and that also affects their behaviour. So sometimes we may not act, we may not have the courage to act, because who knows what happens when you do. So I think there's all sorts of additional things that go in there into that part.
Yeah, Simon, were you gonna say something as well?
Not really. I was just nodding my head because it's like you said, it's an institution, and I'm Simon, but once I go to work, I leave Simon outside.
Yeah.
And this is why I've done youth work. And when I introduce myself, I keep myself as me as possible. If I was going to the Chambers of Commons, I most probably wouldn't send me in there. I'd send a version of me that is well spoken, carries himself, pull up my trousers a little bit, tuck in my shirt. Do you know what I'm saying? But it loses my, which is what I find a lot of these outside forces, and they like this energy from us, but they want to control it and pattern it a different way so it looks. Do you know what I'm saying? And it comes from someone. So it's just like I said, anytime we have something to give, it's hard to really honestly give it because of the eyes that are in the room, and we're usually outnumbered. And it's usually someone that looks like me that doesn't want me to be there because they want to be there. So it's a funny kind of thing. I've had jobs where people have turned me out of the job. When I found out who was the one putting me down, it was someone that looked like me. Because there can't be too many of us in there. There couldn't be.
Yeah.
And this is what we're here trying to change.
So that there can be.
Yeah, so I don't want to talk too much, but I'm just saying what we're talking is very important. And it's any institution we go into, it's good to try and find people where we can just be us.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'll pass the mic.
I think you've perfectly led us onto the kind of general area that we're going to discuss next. So collective identity as a barrier. So I'm going to ask you all, anyone who wants to come in, who are we to one another? We spoke about who we are to health and the system. Who are we to one another? And you really touched on it in that last point you made. You kind of spoke about the fact that to one another, you might walk in and there's a wink. Yeah, brother. But actually, is there what's happening in your head? Are you feeling insecure because now I'm here? Who are we to one another, and how does that impact our experience of getting access?
In particular, but a quote comes to mind, and I was interviewing someone again, just bringing in what some of you two ladies, I'm sorry, Linus and Ade were saying. The first thing is the quote is look for kinfolk, not skinfolk, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And this thing about this project is all looking at women like yourself in senior positions, but the thought it's a burden of one. You're in there alone and what that means. And I was reading something about a lady, very well-established marketing professional, and she said she was really well prepared for a job that she went to and that she was being interviewed for. And she prepared, she had all the qualifications to get that job, and she didn't get it. And she said when she asked for feedback, they said, oh, you know, you didn't come in authentically, you seemed to rehearse. And she said she overthought it, she was performing, she didn't think she could authentically be herself in that space. And I feel that as I'm talking about black women, it could be black men too, we're always leaving part of ourselves out of the room, we're always segmenting ourselves because we've already assessed the situation and said, okay, which bits can I bring in, which bits can I leave behind? And then you take that into healthcare too. I would use an example of black women going through menopause is not necessarily the same as other women going through menopause, but when you're going into the health system, the time it will take to explain why you don't want this or why you don't want, your 10 minutes is up, you're out the room. And what some of you ladies were saying, I'm sorry, I don't specifically remember your names, is we're still like, it's 2025, nobody understands, people don't understand our experience because nobody really wants to listen. You know, the people are talking, you don't know who really wants to listen. And you know, the last point I've made, I don't want to go on, but part of my work as a coach, I work with a lot of ambitious and high-performing women like yourselves, not just black women, but a good portion of black women. And it's this whole thing around identity. There's such a disconnect between identity when you're in the workplace and that stress, burnout, and inner conflict that happens, the impact on your health. You can be doing your job particularly well, but then it impacts your health and it starts to take away from other areas of your life. You're still dealing with all of these systemic barriers that you can navigate, but at the same time, it's taking something from you. And my work is around how to make that person whole, give them back their identity. Sometimes you give up the best part of you, but as you said before, you leave bits of you out the room. Why should you have to leave it out? Leave bits of yourself out the room. We are who we are. We have the skills. We have the knowledge, but there is that this disconnect. That's
Yeah.
Right. I was just going to add to that what Simon and Suzanne has said, and I would say that through Cornerstone, again, sorry, I'm Chi-Chi, the therapeutic mentoring is an opportunity for young people to bring their whole self into that space. And I think, in my experience as a therapist and a community activist, when families and young people that we work with seek support around their well-being, which initially isn't around their well-being, it's around the impact of adultification bias in the education system. It may be an inability to access the support they need for a relative or a child via social care. It could be, you know, an entry into the criminal justice system, which again is impacting health and well-being. And what they're often saying is they don't feel that they can bring their whole self into the space. I can even speak about my own experience going into therapy and knowing from previous experience and previous encounters, I can't bring my spirituality into that space. I can't bring my belief in God into that space, or I can't bring my cultural upbringing into that space, because there's a lens that is actually going to taint my experience. There's going to be a judgment on what I'm sharing in that space, which then impacts the authenticity of that therapeutic space that I'm trying to seek some kinds of resolve and well-being from. And I'm just going to say this here is that also through my training as a therapist, I experienced significant systemic barriers and racism within my counselling training. So again, as a Black professional and a Black human being seeking supportive services, often there are people who are working in the healthcare systems who haven't addressed some of their systemic biases and I should say racist beliefs about Black communities, which then put them in a position to not be able to support those who are generally seeking help at some of their most vulnerable times. So again, I would say when we're looking at solutions, we have to look at training. We have to look at accountability, because I've been in many, many spaces where there's discussions about inequity in health and what can we do. We need to look at training. We really need to look at training. I had to labour through 4 years of training because of the level of discrimination that I was receiving in a therapeutic training space where people are supposed to be more aware and doing their work. And if I'm experiencing that as a trainee, what happens to those patients who are going to be receiving care from those professionals once in the community. So I guess in short, it's looking at training and how the lack of, I should say, empathy and a willingness to listen to those people who come into your space as a health professional, it's imperative. It's imperative. Some health professionals.
I think that's such a really powerful example, and it's really, for me, brought to mind the importance of understanding the history and how we got here. Because I think it puts a lot of responsibility on individuals seeking treatment to sort of make that case for themselves and to sort of find their way through the systems which are not built for them. And I think it's important to remember how we got to where we are, the systems that we have, and that, you know, that racism isn't one monolithic thing. It's sort of racisms that change over time. And so we have to always be aware of what racism looks like in our systems today, and not necessarily think that they are the racisms of the past and we solve them. You know, we got over that. It's done. It's over. We have to think about what does racism and a lack of equitable access look like in the systems that we have now, and not put the responsibility on individuals to sort of say, it's my experience, I'm trying to navigate this, but actually to say, we now understand that the system has changed over time, but we have to continually reinvest in understanding the evolution of the system and our part in it, so that we're not essentially making it someone's, you know, it's a lonely feeling to go through that and to think that, you know, it's on your shoulders to try to address that. But actually, I think it should be all of our responsibilities to be aware of where we came from, where we are now.
You have literally taken me on to the next question, which is, and I was going to ask it again of everybody, who is responsible for the change that is necessary? Because we spoke, Dr. Deborah, before we went live, and you were saying, you know, there's so much that you're doing, there's so much that you're trying to do, there's so much that can be done, there's so much that should be done, but also your hands are you're in handcuffs because there are so many limitations to what you can, you know, achieve and do for all of the different communities. We're just one of many communities that need support. So is it your responsibility? Not yours, but the role yours. Is it our responsibility as the community? Whose responsibility is it to make the changes that are necessary? Yeah.
Because I just want to link into what you were talking about earlier about identity and bring your authentic self to work. And now to answer that bit of your question, may not be able to fully answer it, but I always feel it's a little bit what I can contribute, and it's my responsibility. And as the director of nursing, then it's taken years for me to get to where I am. But right from when I qualified, I've always been passionate about health inequality, and I've faced everything that we've talked about here around racism, and just that barrier. The latest thing now is my passion, and it's been termed negatively because I'm too passionate, and the only thing that's not said is because, yes, you're black. Just finish the sentence, thank you very much. But I've owned my passion, and I've used my passion to make sure that the next generation of nurses I lead, I'm a lead nurse for the nurses in Camden. Obviously, I work with other professionals as well, is to make sure that that passion translates from when I present data in front of the executive team, how that translates to our frontline staff is where I feel my responsibility is. And if I can make a difference to just one person who's going to see someone in our single point of access teams at A&E, if they visit a GP, the data that goes with them, the story, so they're not having to tell their story over and over again. That's the bit that I can talk about. And I actively seek feedback as well from our frontline staff. What else can I do differently? What else are you experiencing at work that can make a difference? And that's the bits that I think in the NHS we are missing. We do a lot of the training. I mean, that's in the training, and some I now have a selective type of training. If it's not good, if what's in it for me would always be, what can I take away from that training? Or how can I translate that training? I keep talking about our frontline staff because we need to invest in their training, or real training. we have data at work, which is called Power BI, that they gave us this access to population health. And I'm focusing on Camden at the moment because I didn't work in Camden, I'm new to Camden. And this rich data, and I was looking at it, but they gave us the data with this new training to kind of get people, the frontline staff, to understand the data, so that when someone like you comes in front of us, comes in front of them, the data should be informing you straight away, because that's the training. We've done the training, we can do the assessment, but the training should now raise alarm bells and sort of say, oh wow, what should I know about Simon? So that you leave when I've done that mental health assessment, so that when you go to your GP, you've got that information, it's shared, it's written in such a way that will be able to understand that data, of course you will, so that you don't have to repeat yourself, rinse and repeat all the time. Now when we go to our VCSE colleagues, our voluntary sector, you don't have to repeat your story. That story, it's you, Simon, should follow you around everywhere. But we do have the training for the people who are sort of representing that training are not, they don't give them enough time to be ourselves. And when we try to be ourselves at work, there's a label attached to it. So people think I can do this because I'm an associate director or nothing. No, I've always been like this. I've just got more authority to kind of say I want you to do this. That's the only difference. Thank you.
Were you gonna?
So obviously from a health professional point of view, I also wanted, this is so interesting for me, and just being, hearing all of you, I've learned so much in this half an hour. I've learned about listening, it kind of keeps coming up, access, kind of these keywords. And actually what I've learned, I've also trained for years and years, and we have all our protocols and we know how to assess somebody, and it's, very kind of, quite methodical. But, we also get, taught of how to also do an assessment of the overall person. But clearly, as I'm hearing, there are some barriers in all of this. And actually, I think what we're seeing, I think a lot of the things we're saying is that people can't necessarily be themselves around healthcare professionals. We're not getting the full story. We're not getting the same picture. We're repeating ourselves many times. Like, I'm hearing all the frustrations, but actually, even taking a step back, like the people we are seeing coming to us in the GP practice is actually a very small minority of people. We're not hearing their stories, but actually there's a load of people who are not even getting to us, who are out in the community, who do need help for whatever reason, are not coming to us. Is it they're too scared to come to us? Do they feel, they got too big a story? Maybe we don't understand. Maybe they're, scared of what we're going to say. Maybe they can't get an appointment with us. Maybe they're seeking help, advice from other people in the community who feel that understood better. And I think that's, where we need to come in and actually have a look at this is quite population health, like who are this group? Where are they? What are their health beliefs? How can we actually work with the voluntary sector and really gain an understanding of them and what they need to actually, they do engage with us, and we kind of can all work kind of collaboratively, in really a safe space for everybody, is what kind of understanding I'm getting. I don't know if anyone else has got anything more to add to that.
Sorry, can I just add? I'm Linus, I'd say I'm Linus again. I came in a bit late. But I suppose, Alice talked about the data, and I think it's really, really important, because I sit here as a black woman and as a black professional. Now, if you look at the data, as a black woman, I'm 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, 3 to 4 times more likely to die of maternal sort of pregnancy-related illnesses. I'm more likely than 2 times more likely than my white counterparts to die of heart disease. All of this data tells something. And in terms of mental health, because that's the area that I've worked in for years, we are more likely to be diagnosed with severe mental illness, less likely to access mental health treatment. And so there's all these more likelies and less likelies that all work against us. And at the end of the day, we all deserve a healthy, long life. And so what we should be working towards is that we're clearly failing because these more likelies and less likelies aren't biological, they're all to do with bias. Do you know what I mean? So it's for all of us, I think, I mean, it's for us health professionals, but it's for us personally, and for those that can act on behalf of people, to make sure that we do something about it, to make sure that we agitate, we're activists, whatever we can be, whatever we can do, we must do, because to be in the 21st century, and these figures are still around, that we are always more likely and less likely to get something, but to have something. And from my perspective, I'm into research. Without that representation in research, we don't have good healthcare for everyone. Because if the treatments, because we have less Black people in research, so those treatments are less relevant to us. So we have to, if we want health equity, we have to have equity in research. And that's what we should be striving for. And I just think it's all of those that can do, it's their responsibility. So all of us sitting here, we can do something and we have to do something. So in terms of responsibility, it's ours. But there are people that can't do, so we do for those that can't. Really. So I can't say it's everybody's responsibility, because some people can't.
Yeah.
But for those of us that can, we have the courage. We have to have the courage to do that.
I love that so much, so much. I'm coming across to you in just a moment because I know you wanted to say something, but I'm hoping it fits into our next section, which Dr. Deborah and Linus brought us really well into, actually. So instead of that collective responsibility that is for those who can, and maybe for those who don't even know that they can, and at different times it may be for us and it may not be for us, and our lives change and things happen, and mental health and all the things. Let's talk about trust. You brought out the likelihood that we're more likely to die in childbirth and so on and so forth. That is a well-known fact, not just in the UK, it's globally. It's just the way it is. And I think it's really important to put some stories behind what we're talking about here. We're talking about research. We're talking about our experiences as professionals and as people who are in the community and interacting with people every single day and so on and so forth. But what does that actually look like? Suzanne, I wonder if, I was coming to you, I wonder if you would mind just briefly sharing the experience you told us about, because I think we have to put a name to some of this.
Just slightly before, to pick up on what you're saying, the thing about trust and research, I would definitely say, and I feel quite strongly about this, and you've touched on it there, there's not enough Black professionals actually leading and doing this research, and even co-producing this research. So as a result, I think a lot of the questions are being missed, even that we would know from our own cultural intelligence to ask the way to approach these things. And it sometimes feels like this, almost like our data is being harvested, put through the existing system that is not there necessarily the most beneficial for us. And so it's not getting the best results. I'd really like to see more Black professionals co-producing and leading this research, because there's that trust in the community to really reach these so-called hard to reach. Right. And with my own personal experience, I would say I would like to think things have changed, but they've probably got, by the statistics, they haven't really. But in the early 2000s, I was pregnant, and in my community, the women I knew that had really bad, the majority of them, childbirth experiences. And there was a common thought that we had at the time, that if you're a Black woman and you go into certain hospitals in London, I can just speak for London, you're not going to get a good experience, you're not going to be listened to. There was at the time, very quick decision to be given the Black women C-sections because they didn't want to go through the labour with them. And there were certain longer term complications with some of my friends and people I knew who'd had this experience. It was quite bad for some of them. And then it came to my turn, and I had a decent pregnancy, no issues. Then I went overdue, went to hospital, and within probably about an hour or so, they were talking about C-section, and I was like, no, I already know what you people do. You just want to cut me open, you haven't got any time, this, that, and I was very, very adamant I was not having a C-section. They did all the scans and couldn't see anything, but they said, your baby's heart rate is dropping, we need to do something. So they had to call the consultant down because I just didn't trust them, I wasn't listening to them. And the consultant said, okay, we'll monitor you, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. I labored for the whole night, nothing was changing, and I gave up the next day by the evening, and they did the C-section. And when they did the C-section, my the umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck twice, and he was choking, he was blue, and he could have ended up with brain damage. And I think the point I am making is they were right, and you couldn't see, I didn't know they couldn't see on the scan what the umbilical cord was doing. I just assumed they could. And that mistrust, that inequity that I knew about really shaped my decision and my stubbornness to not listen to what they were saying. And it can work both ways basically, but that's my personal experience of going in there with that burden already on you. You've got to fight, you've got to, get your equity for you. This isn't going to happen, but it could have worked against, it could have gone another way. I thank God that it didn't, yeah.
Yeah, do you want to go, Linus, and then Zay? Yeah.
I mean, listening to your experience, it's really interesting. Yeah. I had I didn't have to have a C-section, but I had a really bad pregnancy and bad birth. And it wasn't until now when I look back and think, oh God, why did that happen? But I suppose what your story speaks to, though, when you talk about you didn't listen, you didn't trust. There's something on the professionals to understand that we don't trust, and our decisions may be based on that, and they have to make extra effort. They have to do something different for us. And if they understand why we come with mistrust, understand that we do come with that, and kind of think about how they treat us, how they speak to us, then your experience will be different. Because you say, in a sense, you put it on you, I should have listened, I should have, but actually, the issue is for that health professional to understand us, to understand that we come with the mistrust and where that comes from, and to do something differently.
So that was actually what I wanted to touch on. So I wanted to ask, basically, so let's say if you had a professional that was able to identify the mistrust in you, or identify that there's more to how you're feeling in that moment. There's a systemic and a historic context to how you're showing up in that space there. What does that look like then? How does a professional then respond? How do you know that a professional is trained and has that understanding that you spoke about, Linus? What does that look like in practice, and how do we make sure that professionals have that understanding and that practical ability to implement that in the way that they deliver a service? Yeah, sure, of course.
I would say I did all my research beforehand, so I was very well informed, and because I was well informed, and because I was very vocal about the fact, they knew I didn't trust them. So they went to get the head consultant down, who had to then go and compromise with me and basically do things she wouldn't normally do just for me to feel comfortable. So by the time I just said, you know what, this isn't working, I was ready to go ahead with that. So because I could advocate for myself even in that situation, I'm talking about on reflection, I know there's people that are not as vocal. I've been at other births and seen things happen. But then I could say as soon as I got out of the operating theatre back up on the ward, having a cesarean in pain, we can't find your notes, no pain relief, no this, no that, the usual, that starts again. But I can advocate for myself, and I did communicate what I wanted, and I got a compromise. So for myself, I would say, yeah, I did. But for others, normally in situations like that, they need people who can speak up. And can I just say one more thing? I have a friend, a very dear friend, who has sickle cell and has been in and out of hospital her whole life and has had it quite severely. And I've seen over a course of many years the inequity and the treatment that they get, and in certain situations where they can't advocate, and if there's nobody there to advocate for them, how badly it can be. And in that respect, the health professionals know what's going on. They've worked with them long enough. Or I'm thinking of a specific hospital, and it's to do with how do you perceive these people? Why are you dehumanizing their experience? And that humanizing of different people that are not like you. Yeah, that's what I would put there.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm glad we're talking about trust, and for me, and thank you for sharing your experiences, and yeah, to just go back to your question from earlier, I always feel that as for me, as a professional, the burden of proof and that trust in relationship is on me, and especially mental health. I have this thing, it's part of the training and how you translate training to as I was furiously looking for my pen. What I noticed is that in order to develop that trust, you kind of have to have empathy, and you need to be able to demonstrate that empathetic behavior. What does empathy look like? I'm specifically talking about mental health. I then bring my authentic self into that space. But then, because I work in mental health, I work with people who, due to no fault of their own, but due to life experiences and adverse life events, logic to them is probably in that moment out of the window. The burden of proof of me as a professional is not to disagree with them there and then, but for them to see that I see where they're coming from. And in order to do that, you then start, rinse, repeat. Do it again and again and again. So trust within, so that's me in that room with that person. Well, when I leave that space, do people trust me that I've done a good job with that person in the room? So you're forever doubting yourself. Have I done the right assessment? Have I done this right? Have I done, because there's no validation anywhere. So the data is there for us to make use of that data. But we need to find a way to make sure that it's meaningful to someone like you who's done that research, to say, I hear you. Tell me what you know about your research. What can I do in order to validate that experience? And I'm talking as a woman as well, who's been through, the gynae problems when you took just putting that trust in the system took years. Yeah. And I'd rather suffer because that trust, I didn't believe anyone. So it's just about interpreting that personal experience, so that when whoever you're seeing in front of you, when I'm doing supervision, I constantly have to build trust. And then the next time I see that person, build up on the trust from before. So I'm glad we're talking about trust, but it's not a one-off thing that, and the system doesn't support us as well.
Absolutely. Chi, and then we've got questions from the audience.
Okay, I guess I was just going to, Ade touched on what I was going to raise, which is empathy, and it can't be random practices of empathy. So there's got to be some holistic, whole organizational training that connects the data. We all know the data is there. We are more likely across the board, and I guess in the communities and the people that we work with, the trust isn't there, because it's like, how many times are you going to do this research? How many times are you going to be talking about this data? But still, my brother's been sectioned, but still, my aunt had a C-section, but still, my daughter was excluded from school, was adultified. The evidence is there. And when we go and do our vox pops, speaking to young people on the streets, speaking to parents, they are reticent to engage in more research because they're like, the research exists already. How many times are we going to be telling our story and re-traumatizing ourselves, sharing this story? So I think, I can't remember who it was that was saying that, you know, your story should travel ahead of you, so you're not having to re-traumatize yourself speaking about these things. So I think when we say what does it look like in practice, and it sounds so simplistic but so absent for people from African Caribbean heritage when they're accessing services. And I say services because what happens to you at school, what happens to you on your way back from school, stop and search, traumatized, harassed by the police, impacts your well-being. And whether you are going to access another health service because the person who has inflicted discriminatory behaviours to you, it looks like sometimes the person that you're going to be speaking to in front, in a health setting. And you can't disconnect that from your experience here. So it's that thing about humanising people. And also I'll say, this is going off a bit, it's taken me a very, very long time to say the therapeutic mentoring programme in certain spaces is just for African and Caribbean children. But we're saying that we tailor our services, but it's taken me years to say that this is a service specifically for an underserved group of people. That's an issue in itself. So just to summarise, it's like, we've got the research, as you said, connecting the research to your practice. Okay, so you're a newly qualified nurse, you're hitting the ground, you're a GP, you're hitting the ground. I've got Simon because you're here, sitting in front of me. What does the research, what have I learnt in that specific training about the research as to how I need to be shown up for Simon? And on top of that, Simon's a human being. How would I like anybody I know that is sitting in front of me with these issues, how would I want to treat them? And empathy seems to be significantly lacking for people in the African and Caribbean community when they're accessing health services. And when we talk about trust, and I'm sitting here and I'm trying to hold back the emotion that I've connected to my sister's entrance to the mental health system, which was horrific. And the research, the strangest thing was, at the time I was doing a research project at A-level about the disproportionate, inaccurate diagnosis of Black young people with schizophrenia. Somebody here told me what's changed, and that over-medication of people of Black and African heritage, the disproportionate numbers of them being sectioned. So I guess in short, bad news travels like wildfire. So to build trust, people want to see that the professionals are actually delivering or doing something tangible that's going to change their experience. They need to see the change, not just constantly hearing about it. And I don't think that's being negative. We need to be honest about where we're at, and also health professionals, that it can't be ad hoc. Okay, a bit of empathy here, okay, a bit of trust building over here. It's got to be an organizational change. That's the kind of approach that's required. So everybody is receiving what they need.
Okay, thank you so much. You said something I want to come back on. You were talking about why your service being specifically for a targeted group of individuals is problematic. I want to come back to that because I think it's a conversation that needs to happen on camera. And I think people need to understand that actually, you know, people who create services and so on and so forth do think about these things as well. And it is before you just go, oh no, it's only for, there is a whole conversation that happens behind the scenes to it. So I'd love to come back on that. Grace and Mercy says, I agree. From what I have observed, empathy is missing. We also have a comment from Isha that says, when I advocate for myself, I'm called aggressive. I stay quiet because I have to think about my mental health. And then she also says, and this is a question to the whole panel, why should this matter to people who are not Black? I'm Black and I know it should matter, but why should people who are not Black care about this? So do any of you want to answer that one?
Rachel said at the beginning that it would help and benefit if health was good for everybody in the community. Yeah. So I think as much as each community has their own individual problems, which I think should be researched by people from the community, possibly, but it should be combined, as you said, so that the whole community's health and wealth grows together, so that as well, no one will feel they're getting it and we're not. And this is what it's always about. People always feel like someone else is getting a bit more. But if we have more minds like this young lady here that says, hear what? Yeah. Like, if we could, so yeah, like what this person said, why does it matter? Because it matters. Because if we're not well, you're not going to get a good version of us. You're not going to be happy. So if we're all well, it makes sense. I don't know how we fix it and all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying, for me, the answer is it matters to you because we are part of what your daily experience is.
Yeah.
You have to come across us at some place.
Absolutely.
You know, the mechanics, the bakeries, and this is what I'm saying. You know, sometimes it's even scary to go into our own community and ask for extra gravy. Yeah, we know this, isn't it?
Simon, whole different podcast. Yes, we can talk about it.
So, like I said, it's good for all of us to feel nice no matter where we go. A little nod of the head. Yeah. So yeah.
Just wanted to say that I think trust and empathy requires time. We know that in our health service today, that's something that we really lack. So this is an issue that is particularly acute in Black community, and owing to all of the sort of historic reasons that we understand, this is a rational response of this community to the systems which haven't been built for them. This is a rational way of patients and communities responding to that system, but it will affect other communities as well. So the lack of time to build those trusting relationships, to have empathy in the therapeutic or clinical encounter, these are things which are going to affect everyone. And so it's about linking the specific concerns of the community to the wider concerns of everyone. We as citizens, we as users of NHS services, we as neighbors and friends and families, this is things which transcend those communities and actually affect us all. And I think it's about making that argument that saying it's not just, it is for us and about us, but it's for everyone. And we deserve this. By we, I mean the people in this room, but us as citizens more widely. So I think it's about community health, about wider health concerns as well.
What was the name of the person that had the question there?
Isha.
Okay, so to answer Isha's question, there's two reasons. There's a moral argument in terms of why, but I think we've been speaking a lot about the moral argument actually, even today, for example. But also there's a legal requirement though, actually, if we talk about the professional aspect of things. Like if, for example, healthcare providers have a duty of care. So there is a legal requirement that that healthcare providers should be, we're basically talking about the practical implementation really of duty of care. It's kind of how I see it at least, or how it should be implemented. And so, yeah, there's a moral and there's a legal requirement, especially if you are, for example, in healthcare. So that's my thoughts really initially.
You're absolutely right. There's a moral and there's a legal, but also there's an economic as well. So we shouldn't shy away from that because that's what politicians listen to. And actually, this is really costly. This inequity is costing us. Actually, we could be using that money in better ways. So there is, of course, and we kind of feel passionate about the moral bit and sometimes forget. And money always feels like it's a bit of a dirty word. But actually, if you want to persuade those politicians, there's actually an economic argument to it as well. This is costing us. Costing people it keeps people, when people are ill, when they've got chronic illnesses, they're not working. That doesn't provide money to the economy, and we're having to pay for all sorts of different treatments that they wouldn't necessarily need, and all the rest of it. So keeping people in good health economically benefits us all. So make the argument to those that don't want to hear about the moral or the legal or any of those kind of things that get us, those emotional things, but let's just talk about pure hard facts. It's economics.
So we will be clipping this particular bit and tagging the mayor. No, there's something that really bothers me. Siobhan said, I absolutely agree. I feel I have to adjust who I am and the way I look to also fit in to certain situations. And we go back to also what Isha said about protecting her mental health. She stays quiet to protect her mental health. So she's doing her own health service for herself. She's meeting her own need, but in doing that, all of her other needs are not being met. Her medical needs are, we don't know what's going on there, right? So it's a scary thing that goes back to what you were just saying economically, because in our community, mental health is one of, it's most prevalent in our communities. So actually, that's another thing. So she's staying quiet, she's protecting herself, she is self-medicating, whatever that may look like, even if that's just staying quiet. But then, yeah, this knock on it bothers me, and I don't know if any of you have anything to say to that.
I mean, it should bother all of us, and when I see and hear comments like that, it really does sadden me, because, like I said, been in the NHS for several years, and one of my favorite at the time was called Social Inequality. I did an essay on it, and I thought, right, this essay is going to just be that thing. It's just going to change, because the research was there at the time. And to kind of hear that we're still experiencing the same thing all over the world, it's really sad. But again, it just goes back to that the circle of control that I have, and not to underestimate what good looks like, and to just ensure that we have spaces like this, and it's widely shared, and we allow people to come into that space, appreciate that our experience is equally valid, and also we want to hear from other healthcare professionals who don't look like us, for what it looks like from their point of view, and what can we do to work together. But we can't just stop talking about it and empower our staff. You will hear that keep going back to our staff at the front door, to empower them to also speak up. And I think it goes back to our institutions as well. I do in my previous trust, used to go to universities to meet those who are about to qualify, and look at them to say, what's your passion? Why are you coming into nursing? Especially mental health nursing, what's in it for you, and why? It was never about the money. You need to come in and do the right thing. But that kind of conversation's gone by the wayside, because there are different reasons why people now come into mental health, and the space to talk about what's in it for you as a professional is becoming less and less, because we're not able to marry data with story and narrative and people's experiences. So yeah, that's just a quick sort of thoughts that I had in my head, but yeah.
No, thank you. Siobhan says, I do believe they perceive us as strong because we do fight through sickness as well. And Isha said, and it can make me doubt myself. And then we have a question from Wonderful. And this kind of leads us into our starting to think about long-term health outcomes, equity and solutions. Wonderful says, how do we play the game but not change the core of who we are? And I feel like everyone can answer that, because regardless of whether you're from the Black community, you're from a community of women, do you know what I mean? All of us have this experience of being othered at some point. You're not a woman, Simon, I don't think, but you have family members or whatever, or even from your own experience, obviously being part of communities. And one thing I probably should have also thought about when we were doing this is brought in. So my daughter is mixed race, and that's a whole nother conversation that happens, right? How do they feel? What does it mean? How does she go into a room and play the game but not change the core of who she is? How do I teach her that? How do we teach one another that? How do we support one another in doing that? So does anyone, yeah?
I would probably marry my own personal experience and the support that we provide for young people and parents through Cornerstone. And what I would say is, we call it life-changing support, what we provide. And it is about building a network that is tailored to the presenting needs of whoever walks through our door. So in that, I can resonate with what Wonderful said about, I would call it swallowing, because I've had to swallow in spaces so that I can actually get into the space and sometimes do the advocacy work that needs to be done for the families that we're supporting, or even myself when I'm in my personal spaces doing family advocacy. I'm very aware that there's a way that I need to present myself in order for my story to be heard in that room. So I would say a network of support. And in Cornerstone, we have like legal professionals, we have a parent coach, we have culturally sensitive therapeutic support. We try and access work experience because inaccess creates health issues. So I would say it's building a network of partners who have a shared vision and a mission and are culturally sensitive in the services that they provide. So there's an awareness that doesn't create further health issues. Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
I would talk about you're talking about circle of control. So it's something about what is really within your control. And a lot of the time with the clients that I coach, what their circle of influence, the circle of control is quite distorted. They don't realize they have a lot more potential influence and control of the situation that they actually have. And it goes back to issues with their identity, this fragmentation that takes place. And in the work I do, which is a lot around identity, is I developed a model to help women reconnect with who they really are, not with the bits that they think are the most acceptable or to be fragmented, and to deal with the things that have caused them to be disconnected from themselves. And then when they do the work, they become more empowered and more confident to turn up and ask for what they want, not because they rehearsed it or they practiced it, but they understand what their right is, they understand, they have more self-love, more value. It's something that happens at the very core of them. And then what I notice as well is health improves, even things that they do, the stress, blood pressure, need I say, the drinking, all these sorts of things that people do to keep going on to get where they need to go, but lacking that self-care, that begins to change. So I do think that even though without being able to see it yourself, you need somebody sometimes to come alongside you or to be able to do that work for you to reconnect, because this stuff, some of it's intergenerational, some of it happens very young where people are then told who they are is not acceptable. Sometimes it's in the house, sometimes it's from your parents who they had to play whatever game they were playing to get on. They've passed it down to you. Things have changed, but they're still giving you these same messages. And sometimes the things that are most valuable about you are the things that you discard because you believe that, okay, this isn't going to work for me, but actually it's probably the thing that's going to be the best for you if you can own it, but get rid of the things that are in the way. So I do think that we have a lot more capacity and influence than we realize, but it's being able to get rid of the stuff that gets in the way from connecting with it.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really insightful. And another thing that I was just thinking about, my personal experience, is to kind of have a solid support network. Because when you go into certain spaces, you do have to, because of the nature of what you're presenting and in that role or to the audience, behave in a particular way because the work demands it. As long as you don't lose sight of who you are, and then I do reflective journaling, for example, because at the end of the day, I need to go back and say, I need to go back to Ade. I need to find her somewhere, because when I was at that senior leadership group meeting, I wasn't myself. The way I crossed my legs, the way shoes, everything, my purple hair, that's a bit of the authenticity in me that I need to hold on to. But when I go in front of the execs to present a case, it's always to do with patient safety most of the time. How do I translate that passion of mine, hone it down a little bit, not lose sense of me, and then do what I need to do and leave and go, and then reconnect. There's a constant reconnecting that needs to happen. But I guess in all sorts of jobs, regardless of who we are, color of skin, we all have to go to different spaces sometimes to, game or whatever, but we just need to not lose sight of who we are. But that requires supervision, support. I think clinical supervision that I receive, professional support, my friends, my family, and the social network, and being here.
Thank you. We've got a couple of more questions. I'm going to kind of cluster them together because they complement. So Siobhan says, do you think that your treatment during therapy would be more effective if you were able to factor in your own beliefs? And I asked what they meant by that. I'm in therapy and I feel that my therapist, therapy and I feel that my therapist is not as authentic as she could be due to restrictions in her training. I do cry out sometimes just for that human down-to-earth interaction. And then Wonderful says, do we enter therapy by choosing our therapist? Do we have the confidence to request a therapist that can relate to us? Would that support our experience? And these are really, really powerful points when we're starting to think about equitable outcomes and health outcomes, because mental health is at the center of all of this, to be fair, regardless of whether you've got physical ailments, chronic illnesses, acute things. Every single thing we do impacts our mental health. And so there's been a conversation for a long time about dispelling the taboos that come with the Black community being okay with therapy. So then we have people who are now going to therapy and they don't know how to go. They don't know what to feel. They don't know how to feedback. They don't know if this is what it's meant to feel like, because I think something you said, Chi-Chi, about the generational, we learn what our parents did and our parents did and so on and so forth. So Wonderful says, is there something about therapy versus coaching? So yeah, what do we think about that? I know it was a big chunk, but if there was anything you drew out as I was speaking about those two comments, feel free to jump in. We're going to start to wrap up soon too.
Can I just say, just with the last thing about therapy versus coaching, I'm a coach, so I do corporate executive coaching, life coaching, and I wouldn't necessarily use them as labels, but I find how I found my niche and how things developed for me was I wasn't satisfied with giving my clients strategies that they could go away with for 6 months or a year, achieve certain goals without looking at what was really going on at the root. And so that's when I decided if this coaching is going to be successful, if I really want to get referrals, I want to see transformation, so they're not coming back with another problem that could have been dealt with if we just got to the root of it. So different coaches take different approach, but my approach definitely is to look at the root of things, which some people could say goes into therapy. It just depends on, I think, your coach or therapist on what they're saying they're offering, because sometimes you'll have therapists that want to tick all the boxes, but they're not actually helping you to get where you need to go. Do you want to add to the therapeutic?
I would say, just to the question
About being authentic?
About being authentic is therapy should feel authentic. And I know that in the therapeutic journey, the relationship between the therapist and the client, trust builds over time, but the authenticity needs to be there. And I would just say it may be difficult because we talk about finding our voice in places that may feel threatening, may feel uncomfortable, may feel unsafe, may feel unfamiliar, but it's asking those questions. And I would say this is really highlighted to me that there are conversations before therapy within our community that we should be having more of. That what do you ask for? What do you need to see in a therapist? What do you need to feel? Because the feeling often comes within the first few sessions, if not the first session. And just speaking about my own experience, and it was problematic in my training, it's supposed to be authentic in this space, I was penalised for saying that I only want a therapist who is Black, African or Caribbean. That was a challenge because I didn't want to have to do labour in therapy around what I'm bringing to this space before I even sit down. So again, probably money may be a factor, because I don't know, if you're not paying for your therapy, you may not have as much choice, but these are things that we need to look at in the training, because I have to say here as well, training to be a psychotherapist costs tons of money. When we look at income brackets, who is represented in those fields? The counselling journey also is costly. So again, it's diverse access to therapists, whether it's someone who's of African Caribbean descent, male, female, but I guess just in short, it's got to feel authentic. And if it's support that's required to be able to ask the therapist the questions that you need to ask, to be able to feel that you can excel in that space because you've gone there for a specific reason. So I hope that's helpful.
It is, thank you. Linus, and I've got some therapy stories that would make your eyes bleed, but I'll be in touch. So we can extend this conversation on another live stream. Linus, I wanted to ask you, because obviously this is in conjunction with Noclor, I wanted to ask you what you think our collective health legacy could look like. What could this be? Can this be changed? Where are we going? We've discussed the fact that it's anyone who can's responsibility. We've discussed the fact that we have to address trust. We've discussed the fact that systems have to put themselves in a place to understand the experiences of those who come into that room, and to understand that our vulnerability has been rejected so many times that maybe we can't go in and just be, and we have to test and test and test, and that testing may not work for you, the professional who's seeing me, but actually it keeps me safe, even if it puts barriers in my way. What does that health legacy then look like if all of that, if it comes with all of that baggage, all of those things we have to think through, all of those parts that other people in the conversation have to own? In 10 years, where are Black people going to be?
I'll be this. That's a big question.
It's huge.
I mean, I come here believing that it can be different, otherwise I wouldn't be doing the job. So I have to believe it could be different, and it will be different. And I do think it will, because I think even if you just look at the people round this table,
tiny table,
you look at the people here who are speaking up. We probably didn't have that 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So things have changed, and they will continue to change. And we will continue to agitate, and we will continue to push, and things will change. So I believe in 10 years' time, I'm not going to say it's going to be fantastic, because it isn't. Progress is slow, and it's always slow when it comes to us anyway. Do you know what I mean? You need to be patient, you need to be this, you need to be that. I don't need to be any of those things, actually. But things will change, and I believe they will. But it's because of the people around here, the people listening, and the allies we have. There are all sorts of people out there wanting it and needing it. And actually, if I'm honest, the government knows they have to push for it. And that will be on economic grounds. Do you know what I mean? Well, I don't care. Whatever it is that's going to make you change, let's use that, and let's get something good out of it. All of us having good, healthy, long lives is what's important, for all sorts of reasons, and there's all sorts of things that we have to factor in. But I think there is more of a will than, say, there was, I don't know, decades ago in my parents' generation. There's more of a recognition, I think, and I think there's more of a voice. Do you know what I mean? So I think people will be pushing for all of us to be respected, all of us to be represented, and all of us to have that voice. So yes, I think it will get better.
Thank you. I'm going around the room, so that's perfect.
I sincerely believe that there's hope for the future. Like you're saying, this would have never happened when I qualified to. Should I work with a GP talking about health inequality? Nah, it wouldn't happen, because everybody just, it was different. And I'm being real here, because I'm here to represent those frontline workers who it's just their voice. And even when my line manager introduced me to Linus and was like, Adi will be, I believe I'm doing something in Camden, just raising my voice wherever I can. And that just goes back to what I have control over. And just creating a newer generation of nurses who are coming through, who are now changing the care plans. And I mean that in a genuine sort of plan somebody's care, which looks different, which is personalized, taking everything that we're talking about now into account. Now, everyone on the front line is more accountable for the work they do. So we're translating data into that person's journey, their story. So hopefully in 10 years' time, we have more access to technology, and we're trying to use different forms of technology to improve care, but also bring the human connection into it. I mean, appreciating research, what it means to our community. So yes, I'm hopeful that things are going to change in the future. And whilst I'm still, every breath of me, whilst I'm still here working within the NHS, I will still continue to advocate, especially for those who have no voice.
Thank you, Deborah.
I think we really do want to listen to you guys and everyone, from this ethnic minority, other ethnic minorities, to say we're one big population together.
Although I'll stop you, we are the global majority. So yes.
And actually, that's what we talk about people, being who they are in their safe space, which often doesn't happen as soon as you enter a professional's room. As soon as you enter someone you don't know, your barriers are up. Your story's changed. Most of the time, people, we talk about the fact that before people even get into our room and open the door and sit in our, they've already gone around that story 20 times ahead of what they think they're going to say. People already got the story already. So it's how we break that barrier down, how we connect with you guys. And that's why I think it's really important for us to come into your own environments and see actually how you are, rather than you coming to the GP practice and the barriers up and the stories already. We want to break that down. We want to come to the community and work and most natural what their story are doing so far. And I really hope by doing that, and we really are starting to do that now, that we can make, we can break down those barriers, we can make experiences better, we can gain more trust. Often they say, continuity 10 hard minutes. I think we're all up against that. It's again that the first 30 second meeting, you make that kind of already made a judgment. Is this going to work? Is this therapeutic relationship going to work? But not. That's me to get it. Even that first minute, 30 seconds of meeting somebody, like how is this relationship going to go? You kind of know already. It's that empathy. It's a lot going on that first minute already. So we just want to all kind of work together, find out people's experiences, find out who people are, make better health outcomes for everybody, their lives.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the question was around legacy, right?
Health legacy, yeah.
Okay, so for me, what it looks like is basically really developing the community settings for me, it's about what is being done to interact with a clinical setting. What does that relationship building look like? For example, like through youth, through in school settings, through other community-based settings like youth centres, etc. How are we building relationships there before people are even involved in clinical settings? That's really the thing that I see as like being a legacy, is a lot more of community-based interventions being developed basically, and a lot more focus on understanding the full being of a person and building supports around the social development of a human being, and that empathy and that understanding being built into practice at so many different levels, and including the whole family within that process. Yeah, so that's pretty much what the legacy looks like to me.
Thank
And,
you.
Yeah.
Really good point about the whole family as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess I'll talk more about on a policy level. I just want to pick up on Lisa's point about what's happening at a national level and how to influence policy, how we can use this moment to actually make the change. So in some cases, there's an open door to push against. It's just finding the door. It's understanding where the door is, how to push against it, but that there is a willingness that, to work with communities to address concerns, to address health inequalities. And one example is that it's now required for anybody who's applying for receiving funding from the National Institute of Health Research, which is the country's biggest funder of health and social care research, to address health inequalities within the application. So they have to say now, if they're going to receive funding, how this research addresses health inequalities. And that wasn't there a year ago. So there is change, and there are good people who are, who want to see that change happen. It's just understanding it's a very complex system, and it's not always easy, even as an insider, it's not easy to navigate. So it's understanding the system a little bit better, understanding where the doors are, and how to push against them. And the other thing about the current moment that we're in from a policy perspective is, there's this big NHS change, and we're going into sort of a new, what is the brave new future for the NHS, and how do we make sure that communities have an opportunity to inform that change? And I think there's just your point about the community interventions. What does neighborhood health look like? How are we interpreting neighborhood health? How are we developing our services and our care pathways to be informed by community health, by initiatives that are already happening by the BCSC sector? So I think there's opportunities there as well. So there's challenges, but there's also opportunities. And the last point I would say is around data, which has been mentioned a number of times, and connecting data with stories, but also understanding that data and evidence is political. So the questions that we ask, the data that we collect, the stories that we collect, the numbers that we collect, they are inert unless they are used in ways that will, inform and shape and influence. So it's all political. It's all what we collect, what we ask, how we present it. These are all sort of political choices that that we make at a certain point within that sort of chain of events. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know what the legacy will be, but I am optimistic, and I think that there's a lot of really committed and excellent people who are working in concert, but also individually in their own spaces towards that end. So, and this conversation has been part of it, and it's been wonderful to be here.
Thank you.
Brilliant. I guess I'm next. I'm Simon again, Lingway UK Arts, and I'm the voice of the Superman in the community. So I'm going to say, being around tables like this, it kind of secures my senses that we are definitely on the route for change. I can see change. I've seen change. It might be slow, but it's definitely never dying. Yeah, so that's good for me. As for the great minds in the room, they're here. I'm more of a street level, so I'm like a minister of information. Give me the work, and I'm one of the guys that will do it on, like we do it on the roads. We go to the places and we'll implement what the change will be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But everyone should play their position, and my position is to leave these guys to do the work,
Hi again, I'm Chichi from Cornerstone Engagement. I guess I think I'll use a few words. I might not stick to it, but I think, as Lily said, definitely we have to agitate. As Rachel said, we have to, I would say, push open, kick open the right doors. I'm very much an advocate of grassroots up. And it's like, how do we empower the grassroots? And I want to dispel also the connotations about grassroots being disorganized, fragmented. It's empowering the people. I think, as they said, it is community-based initiatives that are needs-led and they're co-produced. That's what young people are often saying. It needs to be co-produced. It's got to be needs-led. I need to see what I need reflected in a service and be part of building that service. And in order for the grassroots to have a voice, again, it goes to empowering the people who don't necessarily have the power or the information to submit some of the bids you're talking about. Because again, there's inequity of access to applying for the funds because you already know what your community needs. So I guess it's agitating, it's policy, and also it's community empowerment, it's networks. Ade spoke about support. Do you have the support to be the agitator? When you do kick that door in, where's the support for you? Because, you know, all hell's going to break loose sometimes for you at work. So it's recognizing those things that people who are agitating, who are advocating, have a well-being cost to themselves sometimes. And also, again, Ade is, you know, clearly spoken about amazing best practice. How do we share that best practice so that Ade's legacy there continues? You know, because there's amazing best practice happening. How are we using that? How is it rolled out nationally? And also, my final point to the research, and this is not to nullify the amazing research that's going on. And I think people here have said it also. How does that research translate to practice? How does that practice now positively impact the communities that research is showing are X amount of times more likely? So that's kind of where I'll leave it.
Thank you.
Just picking up on a few of these points, and just to add something, I would say I would like to see more of an emphasis on prevention and more resources put into preventative measures, which means validating our voices and our experience before it escalates to a point where it's really difficult or it takes more resources, more money, more everything to deal with. But if when we're speaking, it's like, oh, well, it's not that serious, then it's not that, but we know what the next step along that track is going to be. We want our voices to be more validated, definitely. And hopefully in 10 years' time, people talk about preventative stuff, but it will be more easier to have that around.
Yeah, thank you. Benoit, I know you've been off in the corner listening. Do you have anything you want to add as well?
Well, it's just very refreshing to hear, you know, the debates and the people that are here pushing. And it's very well needed in the community. I think, you know, we've got a really great panel here. So they're hitting all the different areas. We've got some very, you know, positive, these words, you know, as an elder in the community, and you do get kind of fed up of hearing it, that it is taken on board. And, you know, we know, you mentioned a very important word there when we talk about economics, of how it filters through, and someone else mentioned from the base upwards rather than from the top downwards. You know, top downwards have been sort of doing for years, it's not really filtering through. So therefore the economics have got to be put in at the base. There's people doing some great work out there, as of all of us here, sharing and putting work, but it's got to be accelerated if it's going to happen. We don't want to hear, as you said, you know, 10 years time, we're going back again. And we've got, you know, we've got to monitor, we've got to know, because when the things come out, you know, everyone talks about the power of AI. Hopefully that will be put in a positive way to, you know, people that know the technology at grassroots, just bam, bam, and filter it through, and then we get the strength in the community at the base level. Yeah, so I was very pleased. I'm glad I did stay. You know, because you know, it's enlightened me. I feel really, really, really proud of you know, what's going on in the groups here. You know?
Thank you. We'll be doing more, so look out for my email. So in wrapping up, because you know, you've given your time for this conversation, nobody has been paid, and I'm not saying that because people care if you have or not. I want people to understand that every person in this room is doing it because it matters to them in some way, shape or form. I read this yesterday. Upholding integrity sometimes means challenging wider institutional decisions or policies contradicting professional values. This matters because upholding integrity is central to ethical and effective leadership, especially in professions rooted in care, education, and social justice. Challenging institutional decisions that contradict professional values is often necessary to protect the people we serve and to ensure systems remain fair and accountable for all. And I think all of us buy into that who have been sat in this room today. So I just want to say thank you to everybody here for amplifying your voice, for being in the room, for having the conversation. You could have sat back and just listened and chosen not to say or share or be vulnerable, but each and every one of you have. So thank you to you all. I just want to read one or two last comments. Isha says, such an informative conversation. Thank you all. I have taken away so many key points. And Grace and Mercy said, we all need to be the change we want to see. So thank you, and we'll speak to you soon.
So